Hey, welcome everybody. Let's talk real estate. Your weekly BS with Barry Saywitz about the current commercial real estate market here in Southern California. As we take a no BS look at both sides of the issues driving this market today to find the best solutions going forward. With our man right in the middle, Barry Saywitz. Hey, Barry.
Hey, good morning, Paul, and good morning to all of our viewers and listeners out there. Welcome back. If it's Tuesday, which I think it is, we are talking real estate. I am Barry Saywitz, president of the Saywitz Company, managing partner of Saywitz Properties. And if it's one thing I've learned in my 30 plus years of doing this, it's to try and surround yourself with good people, try and get good information, make good decisions. And today we're going to try and give you some bits and pieces of some good information of what to do and what not to do. We've got an interesting topic. It's always a favorite of mine in the office, and we always say we should be rolling some kind of a camera in the office when we talk about it. But today we are going to talk about evictions, which is always fun stuff and negative energy for everybody. But it is certainly prevalent in today's society, both on the residential and on the commercial side. And it's so prevalent that I was watching the 11 o'clock news last night, and they were talking about it, amazingly enough. So today we're going to do a little bit of a sort of bantering between Paul and myself, only because I know enough about evictions to be dangerous. And if I put a coat and a tie on, I could probably show up and fake through it. I've been asked a number of times in court, hey, are you the attorney? And I go, no, that guy's out in the hallway. But nonetheless, we're going to talk about it. We'll try and give both landlord, tenant. We're not going to give attorneys any advice. We'd have to charge them. But we are going to talk about what's going on in the world of evictions today. And so that's where we'll kick it off. And so, Paul, I know you ask me about this kind of stuff all the time. And sometimes there's crazy stories that we go through. But I want to talk about what I heard on the news last night. Let's start with that.
Okay.
So the lead topic, lead story on the news last night was that in the city of Los Angeles, between March, which is when they removed the residential eviction moratorium. It was
After how many extensions?
Oh yeah, so I would just tell you, to the best of my knowledge, the Los Angeles eviction moratorium was the last in the entire country to get removed. So there was a federal eviction moratorium that they put in place. That was removed, I don't know, like a year ago, right? And then there was a state moratorium, and then Los Angeles decided to keep their own moratorium for Los Angeles County, and then it just went down to the city of Los Angeles, and they kept extending it. And while I don't have a crystal ball into what somebody was thinking, whether it's the mayor or whomever was making those decisions on the city council, the gist of it was that they were trying to not only protect the legal system from being overflowed with all of these lawsuits by landlords waiting to get rid of their tenants, but it was also that they anticipated that a bunch of these tenants that couldn't afford their rent, didn't have any money, would all of a sudden be homeless. And since the mayor of Los Angeles, one of her big kicks and one of her biggest selling points to get elected was that she wants to deal with the homeless population. But you're basically going to increase it exponentially if you throw a bunch of people out on the street. So let's let them stay for free and just buck the whole society and screw up the real estate economy in the process. Now, I'm tainted because I'm a real estate guy and I'm a landlord.
Right.
If I was a tenant and I got free rent for no reason, or maybe for good reason, then I might have a different opinion of it. But I'll try and keep it as unbiased as I can, as best I can. But the gist of it was we're going to keep extending this thing as long as we possibly can. And so finally in March, they removed the eviction moratorium in the city of Los Angeles. And what happened? The floodgates opened. You don't hear anything about it on the news, except I heard it last night at 11 o'clock.
Well, that's what we're going to talk about today, because the numbers that you shared with me are shocking, and it's something everybody worried about. It almost seems like they created a ticking time bomb. Once you tell people that they don't have to pay the rent, that they can't be evicted, that's a relief for those who lost their jobs during COVID and suddenly can't pay, their business is shut down. I get the gist of it. They didn't want a ton of people suddenly out on the street magnifying the problem here. And it was an artificial emergency that was created out of what? I don't know.
Yeah, but that was years ago
I
now,
know.
right? And so while I am not unsympathetic to those folks that struggled through COVID, I am not unsympathetic to people that lost their jobs or who are struggling financially. I get those things. But the flip side of that is you have to keep a roof over your head. You have to keep a roof over your family's head. In the same capacity, that has to be right up there with I have to eat.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's not after a whole bunch of other things. It's
Right.
not after my new TV. It's not after I sit on the couch and watch TV all day instead of looking for a job. I mean, unemployment is at historic lows, right? You have unemployment 3-4%, right? It was down even less than that.
Right.
You can get a job at Walmart as a greeter and make almost $20 an hour, right? And I'm not picking on Walmart. There are plenty of jobs out there, and that may be beneath somebody's anticipation of what they think that they're worth or what they're supposed to be doing. But the fact of the matter is, if it was me, and I had to put food on the table, and I had to keep a roof over my family's head,
Right.
I would do what it took. And it's not that I've been looking for jobs and I can't find one. Those people that are out there today that don't have a job for an extended period of time either don't want to work or are looking for something that maybe doesn't exist or a needle in the haystack. It's not because there are not good paying jobs out there. That's just not the case.
So look at the rationale that you even shared, though. It's no longer about protecting people. It's about not overwhelming the legal system, not adding to the homeless problem. We recognize that people can get jobs. We recognize the need for this thing has probably gone away. The emergency's over. But we've now got a backlog of so many people that didn't pay.
Right. Well,
that we're afraid to suddenly pierce the boil and
right. Well, now, look, if you were to rewind 6, 9, 12 months ago, the residential housing market was tight as a drum. The other problem that people had that when they got evicted was they had no place to go. Now, the truth of it is, if you have no money, you have no place to go anyway.
Right.
And I don't say that jokingly, but you will have to go with family. You'll have to go to a homeless shelter. You'll have to bunk up. You'll have to get roommates or whatever you need to do to get by, as opposed to just staying for free. That gig is up. And so others that how do I say this politically correctly? That just stiffed their landlord, right, on purpose and said, hey, I think I can get away with this, and I'm going to milk the system, or I got assistance from the state or the city or the county or whatever it was. I'm just not going to pay. Those people should have plenty of money. And so what's happening now is the real estate market's cooled, right? And so there are opportunities for you to rent other places out there, which is why it's just mind-boggling to me that if you were a tenant, that you would, if you had any other choice but to get evicted, you would take the other choice. Now, let me back up for a second.
Right.
The story I heard last night was, in terms of fun facts for everyone out there are almost 50,000 eviction lawsuits that have been filed in the city of Los Angeles alone.
50,000, right.
Between March of when the eviction got lifted and August, right? So in a 4 or 5 month period, that's 50,000 lawsuits. Now, that's not 50,000 people that are going to be kicked out of there wherever they live.
Right.
That could be 200,000 people because each apartment might have 3, 4, 5 people in it, right? People, that's not everybody who just lives alone. These are families, these are roommates, these are multiple person dwellings.
Right.
So you have several 100,000 people are going to be displaced. Now, does that mean that they will all be homeless? It'd be interesting statistic to see how many of those people, how far behind in rent are they, right? And the story, again, I don't know where they got their facts, but I mean, it was hundreds of millions of dollars in lost rent to landlords that hadn't received any money. And so these are people that have been in their apartment going back to probably last year. Right? So 6 months, 9 months, 12 months not paying any rent. Forget about COVID, because the COVID relief was over a year ago, and they might have gotten COVID relief and then turned around and not paid right after that. Now, I think you have to break it down into groups of people. There are people that are legitimately struggling, legitimately unable to pay their rent,
Right.
and maybe have no other place to go. In which case, at the end of the day, someone needs to look in the mirror and go, look, I need a solution here. And if that solution is to go to a shelter or get some assistance, I need to start looking for that now. I cannot just sit and wait for the sheriff to come and change the locks. And so you have to wake up and you have to figure that out. There's another segment of people who I believe are out there, which I think is a large percentage of people that just thought they could get away with it, that have the money and don't pay.
And that's where everybody's going to go, what? I wonder if we'll ever know. I wonder if we'll ever study this enough to understand. Of the 50,000 people who are now being evicted, 10% of them, 50% of them?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to know. But I mean, I would just tell you from our own
Anecdotal.
Well, no,
Yeah.
from our own statistics, from our own portfolio, I would just tell you that it is greater than 50%. No joke. Of,
Greater than 50%
of
of people
people.
who said, I'm going to take advantage of this
Well,
opportunity to not pay rent.
yeah, and what I would tell you is in today's environment, you have a new spin of what's going on. And how widespread it is or not, I guess, remains to be seen long term. But now, because the markets are softening a little bit, right? Rents have flattened a little bit,
Hmm.
and you have a few more apartments available than there were before. Whereas before, if you rewind 6, 9 months ago, it was almost nothing. Now at least I have some options. We have tenants that are out there going, look, I found a cheaper, nicer, bigger place, or I found a place with a yard, or I found a place with a washer dryer and yours didn't have it. And so I just went and signed a lease down the street. And I go, wait a minute, you have a lease with us. Yeah, well, I'm leaving.
Hmm.
And I'm not giving you notice. Or some of them say, look, I'm going to give you 30 days notice. And I go, well, you have a lease. I mean, you can't give 30 days
Yeah,
notice.
right.
That's the whole point of having a lease.
Right.
If you could just give 30 days notice,
This isn't month-to-month
right,
arrangements.
then right, if you are month to month, you can give 30 days notice. If you have a lease, you cannot just up and bail in the middle of your lease. There's repercussions for that, and that doesn't get you evicted, but that does get you collections or a lawsuit or damaging your credit and maybe garnishing your wages down the road. It's just a bad idea. But why do people do that? And so the people that I've spoken to, they just said, well, I had to do what I had to do, right? I mean, I found a really nice place. I liked it better than yours. Or, hey, yours didn't have a garage and this one had a garage and I just got a new car, so I want to put my car in the garage. I mean, these are crazy ideas that you just, and they say, well, can't you just rip up my lease? No, I can't, because if I did that, then the bank would
Everybody.
never, well, one, everybody would do it.
Yeah, right.
Number two, what's the point of having a lease to rip up? And then number three, no bank would ever lend to me because
No guaranteed income.
they would just say you're a horrible landlord if you just start ripping up
Yeah.
people's leases. So you can't upset the apple cart of what is society and what the law states just because you think it's okay. So let's go back to the eviction for a second.
All right.
So when we talk about the eviction, people also, the perception is, even if you're going to evict me, Mr. Landlord, right? I'm not going to pay you. I wasn't paying you anyway. I'm not
Right.
definitely not going to pay you now. And I'm so deep in the hole, I could never get out, right? So think about it for a second. If your rent was $2,000 or $3,000 a month, and you were 6 months behind in the rent,
Or a year.
right? But I mean, we have people that are 3 or 4 months behind in the rent, right? I
Right.
mean, if you didn't have $2,000 or $3,000 for this month or last month's rent, how are you possibly going to come up with $10,000 or $11,000 in rent?
Never.
And then if I told you definitively, I cannot let you stay, I'm going to evict you, as nicely as I can say that, you have to leave. And then they said, well, why would I leave? I'm just going to save up my money and keep stiffing you, which is what I've been doing. And then I'll need that money to put down on a new place and get some new furniture and pay for a mover. And so they definitely don't pay. And then the hole gets so much bigger that I could never possibly get out of it. And so at the end of the day, the remedy for the landlord is to do the eviction. They will get a judgment against you, right? They get a judgment against everyone who is on the lease. So if there's children over 18 years old, your credit is damaged for 10 years or more. And if there's roommates, don't think that you're not on there. If you're the grandparent or the uncle who lives with them, you'll be named on there and it will go on your credit. Eventually you will get another job. Eventually you'll have some kind of income, and eventually someone will find you. And then they will start garnishing your wages, whether that is the landlord, whether that's a collection company. And then eventually that judgment and that mark on your credit that you stiff somebody for a significant amount of money is going to come back to haunt you. And it may come back to haunt you when you go to get a student loan. It may come back to haunt you when you go to get a car loan,
Right.
when you apply for a credit card, when you apply certainly for another apartment, right? There's many things in life that you need good credit, and someone would look at it and go, oh my gosh, you stiffed your landlord for $10,000. They have a judgment against you. And it goes to your character, right? Now you can brush it off and say, well, my landlord was a jerk and he didn't work with me, or it was COVID. You can't say it's COVID in 2023 or coming up on 2024. It doesn't hunt. Any other landlord out there is going to know that that's just not the reality.
So can I ask you, one of the other ugly parts of this equation is, two parts come to my mind. One is, what really happens when you say you're not going to pay? I get everything you just said. You're going to get a judgment, you're going to get bad credit, but so often it seems like somehow these things just get
Oh yeah.
worked out or go away or
So
something.
look, we try and meet with tenants. We call them, we email them, we text them, and then sometimes you get what I call the the head in the sand move, which is I don't answer the door, I don't call, I don't do anything because I don't have a real good answer to tell you, and my
Right.
plan is I'm just going to stick around. So once you get that pretty quick from a landlord's perspective, for those landlords out there who don't do it, I mean, my suggestion is just go ahead and file the lawsuit, right? And you start the eviction, and yes, it costs money in legal fees, and yes, it's negative energy, and yes, once the tenant finds out, they might not be happy with you. But I mean, the fact of the matter is, as the landlord, you didn't breach the agreement, the tenant did, and there's
Right.
ramifications for that. And so until the tenant believes that there's ramifications, nothing happens. And so what tenants also have some tenants have a fallacy in believing. Somebody said this to me last week. They said, well, it's going to take you like a year to evict me.
Exactly.
Right?
That's what I'm wondering. Right,
So
yeah.
let's be clear about how that works. If we were to rewind during COVID, right when the eviction moratorium was taken off, it definitely didn't take a year, but it probably took 4 or 5 months.
Mm-hmm.
And in Los Angeles, in the city of Los Angeles, now that there's these 50,000 lawsuits that have been filed, then yes, it could take up to 6 months if you're in one of those jurisdictions because there's so much backlog now for the courts.
Right.
So the mayor didn't do anything to accomplish that other than kick the can out a few months, and now it's all going to hit. But in Orange County, in Riverside County, San Bernardino County, San Diego County, all of those counties are doing evictions in 3 months or less, right? And so from the time I file with the attorney to the time that the tenant gets served is probably a week or 10 days tops.
And can they delay it? Can they come
So
up with
look,
other arguments?
you can
and-
try. I mean, you can try and file a counter lawsuit. You will have to go get your own attorney. You could file an answer, and you could go in front of the judge and tell them the landlord's terrible. My place has roaches, and the landlord didn't maintain it, and do whatever you need to do. But at the end of the day, there also is no sympathy for the tenant in the sense that if you did not pay the rent, and now you're making up all these excuses. Right? We had a tenant come to court and try and tell the judge that there was mold in the apartment, when in fact we'd been in the apartment 10 times and we have no record of any maintenance requests from them, any phone calls, any texts, or anything
right.
reaching out to say, oh, gee, I might have mold. Right? It was just a game. So the fact of the matter is, if you don't pay and the landlord starts your eviction, in today's world today, you're going to get evicted in 3 months or less, and then it's going to be on your credit. Now, what happens is once the judgment or the writ is entered by the court, that is on your record, right? And
Yeah.
that's permanent, and that's going to stay there for at least 10 years, and then it's going to show up, whenever anybody goes to run credit. I mean, think about if you go to apply for a job and they run a credit or a background check on you, and they're going to come up with it, and then you're going to have to come up with a story.
So why don't these people fear that?
Well, so look, if I just legitimately don't have the money, then I would just recommend for those tenants out there and those landlords out there, go meet and have a conversation and try and figure out what is a better solution than me suing you and evicting you and throwing you out on the street, right? Because my goal is not to put anybody on the street. My goal is to just have somebody in there that's paying the rent. And
Right.
if you can't do it, just give me the opportunity to rent it to someone else who can.
And so are landlords willing to cut deals? That's the other assumption. It's expensive.
Right.
It's time consuming. So I'm not going to pay you for 3 or 4 months, maybe with the assumption that we'll cut a deal.
Right. So then the question is, do I just stiff the landlord on purpose in hopes that he'll cut me a deal later on? And I
Right.
would say that is a very tricky line. If you're a tenant and you're thinking that, please don't do that. I would tell you, if someone didn't have the money as a landlord, I already assume you cannot pay me. I just want you out, right? And so the sooner you can get out, maybe the better the terms are, maybe the more I can work with you. I'm not waiving what you owe. I don't think anybody else is. And nobody's doing the cash for keys anymore to get out.
That's
Because
what I was going to say.
yeah,
For a while
because-
they were saying, here, just I'll give you
because-
some cash and leave. Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to say nobody, but I mean, look, if you think about it, if you owed $10,000 and then on top of it, you want me to give you enough money for first month's rent, security deposit, and enough money to physically move,
Right.
that might be another $6,000 or $8,000. And then on top of it, people get greedy and then they say, well, I need more money than that because I'm not working. So give me another 10,000, right?
And people actually do that? I mean, it's that kind of negotiation.
People
they say,
do it
That's what flabbergasting. I hear the stories of you and your guests. I wish we could have a camera. I wish we could do a reality show on this because I think the reality, it would shock most of the public. The number you're saying up to 50% of the evictions that you're experiencing are people that are probably just playing a game, that really probably could pay the rent, but are trying to use the system, use the moratoriums, use all the cost of litigation, all this stuff.
Think about it for
they're
a second.
gambling.
Yeah, because think about it for a second. If you really cared about your credit, if you really had good moral character and felt badly that you did not live up to your own financial obligations, and really, at the end of the day, if your goal was to have a roof over your head or your family's head, then if it was me, again, this is me talking, not somebody else who takes a different path of action, I would try and cut some kind of a deal with the landlord, either to do payments over time, or look, I can get out quickly and so you can rent the unit. I'll cooperate in helping to show the unit. I'll keep the unit clean, because now you're making an effort to work with the landlord, so you should expect or hope that you would get something in return.
Right.
The flip side of it is, if you're not answering the phone, if you're not taking care of the place, you're not cooperating, you're not letting people in there to even take a look as to what's going on, then why would anybody work with you at the end of the day? And then why is it a big shocker that the landlord's not going to work with you when it comes time? And then we have people that call the night before the sheriff is coming to lock them out and say, can I get more time? No.
No.
Why would I give you more time?
Yeah.
I've been waiting for this event for a long time. And then you just need to get out. And then what happens is people don't make plans. I can't tell you how many times people leave the apartment and then leave half their personal belongings in the apartment. We have to haul it away because they just left it because they had no place to go. Look, there's storage places out there, right? If you have a bunch of stuff and you go, hey,
you can probably get the first month free.
You get the first month for $1, and then you can figure it out, right? I mean, there are solutions out there, and people don't take advantage of those. Now, let's just talk about the eviction process for a second, because once the eviction process is started, the landlord cannot accept any partial payments in rent.
That's what I've heard. If he does, then that he or she does.
So if you owe me $10,000 and you call me up like somebody did the other day and said, I've got $3,000, can you just take it? And the answer is no. And I mean, I'd love to take it. I want to take it. I cannot take it. Right? You want to come up with the other 7. And then the problem is the legal fees that the landlord incurs get tacked onto the tenant's ledger. Right? And then as time marches on, if that process takes a couple of months, you're just incurring more rent as it goes.
Are there people that are habitual scammers that go from place? I'm amazed.
Look, I think there are, but I mean, as a landlord, if you're running the credit on people and you're doing a background check and you're verifying income, that somebody has a legit job and income, that's the best that you can do. But I mean, to say that there aren't still bad people out there in the world, that would be a fallacy. There are people out there that take advantage of it.
I had a bar and restaurant for a number of years. It was the biggest eye-opener to me. You talk about moral character. You'd give people a job, enthusiastic young employees I'd think the world of, and I'd find out they're stealing. Not once, multiple times. And one guy caught stealing. And he laughed, and he said, okay, you caught me. We can still be friends, though. And I'm like, no, you took money out of my pocket.
Right. Talk to the police how
this isn't a game. And I think too often just people see, so you win a few, you lose a few. I took a few bucks, I got away with it. I didn't pay the rent, I got away. This moral idea of I'm going to feel bad because I stiffed somebody.
Right. Well, and somebody else looks at it and says, hey, you're the big bad landlord. You could have worked with me. You didn't. Or we have tenants that during COVID, we worked with them. We worked with them for an extended period of time. And then we just said, look, COVID's over. You need to get a job. You need to be able to pay the rent. If you cannot pay the rent at this juncture, you have to leave. So how about let's pick a date and you can just move out. And then we'll rent the unit to someone else. And then they go, no. Right? So then you're like, okay, you're not leaving me any choice. I'm going to have to file the eviction. I don't want to. You sure you don't want to have another conversation? And then they don't. But I mean, it's interesting. But you look at California, because how crazy California is.
Compared to other states.
Compared to other states, right? I have a friend who owns a portfolio of apartment buildings in Ohio. And I said, how's it go there? And he said, well, they issue the 3-day notice to pay or quit, right? So for those of you who don't know, right, if your rent's due on the 1st, which everybody's is due, it's usually late by the 3rd or the 4th or the 5th, depending upon what your lease says. And then after that, you could be charged a late fee. And after that, the landlord in California and in other places would issue what's called a 3-day notice to pay or quit, right? So in California, it's a 3-day notice. Other states, a little different. But you have 3 days to pay or quit. What does that mean? It doesn't mean you have 3 days to pay. Otherwise, you have to move out, right? We gave a 3-day notice to somebody and they moved the next day. Right? That wasn't the goal. The goal was to give you notice that you owe the money, and if you don't pay in the next 3 days, we could start the lawsuit against you to start the
Because
eviction.
everybody needs notice under the legal system.
Sure, but I mean, does any landlord start the eviction on the fourth day after the 3-day notice expires? I would just tell you no, right? And for those tenants who are chronic late payers, they probably get a 3-day notice every month. And so it doesn't even faze them because they're used to it because they don't pay on time. Right. But the whole goal is to put the tenant on notice that there's a process here, and I'm starting the process. Now, when you get to court, you need to have that 3-day notice if you're the landlord to show you gave them proper notice. In Ohio, you give the 3-day notice, and after the 3 days is up, if the tenant hasn't paid, you call the sheriff, and within like 2 or 3 days after that, they come over, change the locks, yank them out, throw their stuff on the front lawn. Now, as a landlord, you gotta love it, right? As a tenant, it's a problem.
Yeah.
Now, I would tell you the average rent in Ohio, nothing against Ohio, is a heck of a lot less than it is in California. So if you're a landlord in Ohio, number one, you will not get stiffed for very much money because the rent is cheaper. Number two, your downtime is really minimal because the whole process to get the tenant out is so short, and the tenant knows it.
What's the average time here in California?
Well, that's what I'm saying is we have people that have been in there a year that haven't paid at this point, right? So now the average time could be, 90 days, right? But that's 90 days versus 3 or 4 days. That's a big difference. And the other difference is if you knew the sheriff was coming, you would act differently than if you believed the sheriff is not particularly coming, right? And so it used to be the sheriff would put a notice up, and then they'd come the next morning and you'd meet them there and change the locks, and you had to get your stuff out. You had like 2 hours to grab all your stuff if you hadn't done it because you knew that it was coming. There's an event here as the tenant, you know it's coming. Now what happens is the sheriff posts a notice and they give them 5 days just to be nice, so the tenant has time to prepare and move their stuff out and do whatever. And so the sheriff's office here in Orange County and the people that I've talked to that are part of the process, at the end of the day, at this point, I don't think there's much sympathy for tenants because they've gotten plenty of notice. They've had plenty of time. They've known the process is going on. This is not a big shocker to anybody. So if the sheriff shows up and you're just clued out and didn't pack up and you have an apartment full of stuff, you're going to get locked out, right? And they're going to give you an hour to grab whatever you can. And then the landlord will have to make arrangements with you to come back and get your stuff. But it's not like you get another 3 months to get your stuff. You don't. It's crazy.
It's crazy.
So what I would say is, look, if you're a tenant and you really can't pay the rent, call your landlord, try and figure out a solution so you don't wreck your credit, so they don't sue you, and then maybe they either cut you a deal, maybe you stop the bleeding, maybe you can make payments, maybe combination of all of the above. But you are foolish to think that in this world that you're not going to get evicted in fairly short order.
You're never going to have to pay.
And at the end of the day, it will come back to bite you at the end of the day. And, look, I've had people say, hey, I'm 70 years old. I don't care if you wreck my credit. I'm retired. Right. And I've had people, that are 25 years old saying, hey, I don't care. It's not a big deal to me. And then I would say to all of them, credit's a big deal. Right. Yeah. I don't care who you are and how old you are. It's going to come back to haunt you.
I want to create a reality show. We've said it since you started this thing. The stories you tell off air of these eviction processes that you go through with the most ridiculous. We're not talking about the legitimate sad stories. There are those. People that just can't pay. But the people that are gaming the system, that are people are knowingly trying to roll the dice and hope that they never have to pay, or that you'll literally pay them to leave.
Look,
it's
wrong. And so it used to be during COVID that tenants would talk to their neighbor and they'd say, oh, I got $30,000 from the government for my rent, right? When they were giving it away like candy.
Right.
And even in Los Angeles, the county and the city, they were giving away money. Remember when they were talking about defunding the police and they took $50 million out of the police budget fund to show the public that they were defunding the police, and then they gave it to tenants in underprivileged areas, and they designated certain areas as being underprivileged, right? And so we happen to have a building in one of those areas that got designated, and we asked all of our tenants to apply, and they said that they did. Not one of them got a nickel, right? Because $50 million in the county of Los Angeles goes nowhere, right? And then how do you determine who is best to get that money and how much do they get? I went on a webinar with the head of the California Rent Relief Program where they were talking about the program, and she flat out admitted We have no means to check the validity of anybody's application. We have no means to determine who is more desirable or deserving of this money than not. So we're just picking up the applications, and then our staff is making the best judgment call that they can because we've been told, get the money out. It's sitting in the coffers.
Right.
And all that means is I'm just giving away money to people, many of whom don't deserve it. And the people that really deserve it, a lot of them got the shaft.
That's the sad reality. There are people who really do. This program had an intended target group of people. There was a legitimate reason to help these people. A national emergency happened, COVID, through no fault of their own. And all of a sudden, this has just been like so many of these programs taken advantage of by others. And
well, those programs are over, right? Candidly, those programs are over. And there are very few agencies out there that have funds available to help tenants. And there are some, so I don't want to knock those that are out there that are trying to do good things and help. But those agencies are not paying 6 months of back rent for you because you didn't go looking for a job, right? I mean, if you need a shot in the arm for 1 month because you've had a struggle, because you lost your job and you have a window and you were living paycheck to paycheck, and because you didn't have income for a month, you need time to get back on your feet. Look, me as a landlord, if I heard that story and was able to verify it, I would work with the tenant. Mm-hmm. But when you show up 6 months later and say, I have been working for 6 months and I'm deep in the hole, now my landlord's actually going to throw me out and I'm about to get evicted, I need help. Where were you before, right? Yeah. I mean, where have you been? So now let's talk about the commercial side of things. And I guess I want to differentiate between the residential and commercial because they really are different processes. And the difference on the commercial is that you're not kicking somebody out of their home, which is a difficult,
right,
emotional thing for people.
And there was no moratorium
and there was no moratorium on commercial. And so you could have kicked out your tenant during COVID if you wanted to, except that most landlords did not want to do that because there was nobody waiting behind them to rent the space. So the MO of most landlords, in most instances, not all, was I want to try and work with the tenant to keep them in there because it's going to be expensive to re-rent the space. There's nobody standing behind them in line. And if I have to make them some accommodation to get through COVID, then I will do that. But if I really was convinced that they had no money and couldn't pay the rent, then I guess either you leave or I kick you out. And so in most instances as a business, you have staff, you have operations, you need to keep the lights on, you need to keep the phones on, or you really are out of business. So there's many companies that really went out of business, in which case if you went out of business, you would just give the landlord the keys and then they would be able to
you still had a lease, but as soon as they release it, then theoretically.
And so there's no reason to hang on to the property because
you're not living there.
I'm not living there and I don't have anything in there, and I would take all my stuff and leave because the stuff that's in there, the desks and the computers, would have value, even if I'm selling it, right? So it's a different MO than I'm just going to keep squatting it in the apartment.
You think there are less scammers in the commercial space, less people trying to take advantage because there was no.
Well, yeah, I do. And then also, if you're going to sign an expensive lease and your company has not great financials or it's a startup, in many instances, the landlord would get a personal guarantee from the principals of the company.
Right.
So if you did sign personally and you stiff the landlord could come after you personally, your house, your next income, whatever the case is. And so that's kind of a big deal. Now, people that didn't sign personally, that just had a corporation on the hook, if the corporation really went out of business or bankrupt, there's really not much the landlord can do, and there's protections for the principals of the company. But if you thought you were just going to skip on the landlord and you'd signed personally, it's a different ballgame for sure. And so, but on the commercial side, the legal fees are more than on the residential side. I would just say on the residential side, the legal fees to do an eviction are anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000. They are not massive amounts of number. So somebody was talking with a tenant. He said, well, if you're going to evict me, it's going to cost you, tons of money to evict me. Why would you want to do that? And I said, well, number one, you're not paying. Number two, the amount of money that I have to pay my attorney is peanuts compared to what you're stiffing me on. And then thirdly, I'd rather pay him and have you get out than not pay him and have you give me more stories as to why you can't leave.
Right.
If you'd like to leave, I'd like not to pay the attorney. I'd like not to sue you. Let's come up with a solution to move. And, I've heard a million stories as to why people can't move.
Well, we got to create a book or a reality show about those million stories because I can't. Some of them are hair raising. Some of them are unbelievable. And it makes people wonder about for every good action there seems to be five
Well,
bad
yeah,
results of some of these programs here.
and you don't hear stories on the news or people talking at coffee talk about all the people who paid on time that are really good tenants because there's nothing to talk about. That's not juicy. You hear the juicy ones, right? But on the commercial side, just to back to my story, is the commercial side, the legal fees are in the thousands, but also the rent could be in the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. And in an apartment lease, it's typically a year, right? In a commercial lease, it could be 3, 5, 7 years, even 10 years. And so if you stiff the landlord, while you don't owe 10 years of rent, you owe until it gets re-rented.
Right.
And so if you stiff the landlord on, let's just call it some office space in the Irvine spectrum where there's a decent amount of vacancy, it could be a year until they fill the space. Now, the landlord has a duty to remarket the space. And so let's assume that they fulfill that duty and they start advertising and they hire a broker and they're marketing it, but they didn't come.
Right.
And so it took me a year to rent it. And then when I rented it, I had to build it out for the next guy. And then I had to pay leasing commissions, and I might have had to give them free rent or concessions to get them into the space. You, as the tenant who stiffed the landlord, who walked off the lease or whatever you did, if you didn't go out of business and you're still around or on the hook for a personal guarantee, they're going to come back to you at the end of the day, and they're going to add all that stuff into their damages, and they're entitled to, and they will get it if you wind up going to court. And so you better settle and better figure out how to work something out with the landlord at the end of the day. But then what happens is the landlord starts looking into your finances and says, hey, you live in a multi-million-dollar house, you drive a nice car, you owe me a couple $100,000 on the lease, I'm going to stiff you. I mean, I'm going to sue you, and then you're going to owe it. And so, that is a whole nother game in and of itself, as opposed to, I just went out of business. There's nothing here for you. Please just go try and rent it to someone else.
Well, we've gone way over our time, but it's worth it, every dime of it here, every second of it, because I really wish people could hear the real stories of what you really go through. I think it would give a new appreciation to being a landlord.
But I think, look, for tenants out there, please don't think you can get away with it, because at the end of the day, it's going to bite you in the butt. And then at the end of the day, it's going to wind up costing you more money. And if you figure, hey, I'm just going to stiff the landlord anyway, what's the difference? I think that's just a bad philosophy and a bad way to go through life, and it's bad karma on top of it. If you're a landlord, certainly you want to work with your tenants as best you can, but once you realize that there's no end in sight, then you file the lawsuit and do what you can and try to minimize your losses.
Are like the tenants, just wishing it'll go away and wishing if I keep putting it off and keep ignoring it, somehow it'll resolve itself, somehow we'll cut a deal, somehow this will magically solve itself. It's almost like everybody's afraid to rip the Band-Aid off and look at the wound here.
Yeah, but I mean, look, if there's jobs out there and you can gainfully find employment, why can't you afford the rent? I mean, there's the fallacy of things.
Yeah, you're just saying that people choose to.
So I would just say, look, it's in everybody's best interest to try and work together. But if there's a breakdown in communication and you're the landlord, I don't hesitate to take the legal route. And if you're the tenant and it gets taken against you, you need to figure out a different solution than waiting around. That's not a good end game for you.
All right. Appreciate your insights here. Look forward to hearing more either on air or off air about the continuing nightmares that you're experiencing with tenants who are literally...
It's not just me. I mean, look, there's 50,000 other people out there that filed a lawsuit in Los Angeles, in the city of Los Angeles. It'll be interesting. I think we check back in the first quarter and see where those 50,000 lawsuits are and see whether all of those people got evicted and then what that did to the housing market. That'll be the interesting thing to see.
I think that would be interesting. All right. We'll pick it up. All right. Take us out here.
Anyway, fun stuff, all juicy conversation. For those of you out there, thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. I am Barry Saywitz, president of the Saywitz Company. Today is Tuesday. It's Let's Talk Real Estate. Tune in next week, and we'll have more for you. Thanks for tuning in.
Well, there you have it. You've been listening to Let's Talk Real Estate, your weekly BS with Barry Saywitz about the current state of the real commercial real estate market right here in Southern California. On Orange County's only community radio station, OC Talk Radio, streaming live from our studio here at the University of California, Irvine's Beale Applied Innovation Center.